the objective of our game is to collect all of these green balls, and we want that every single time the ball is collected, it will emit this essence, this collection of particles. And we're going to achieve this with Unity's Shuriken particle system, which is its very nice system of setting up any sort of effects that you might want: fire, dust, sparks, clouds, and in this case we're going to have a somewhat abstract effect. So considering the particle system as a component, we would first need to create a game object. So let's just create a new one. I'm going to place this within our level, a little bit higher. Going to name this essence. We're going to go to add component into the inspector, type in particle system, press enter. We automatically see some of these puffs that are going into the Z direction. We want it to go up instead of to the side, so we can actually simply take this game object and rotate it. Okay, and then we can simply type in the value to get a precise value of 90 degrees in the inspector. Because we want to cover many things in this hacking game tutorial, I'm only going to cover the settings which are currently checked off by default in the Shuriken particle system editor. Now all of these values can be either displayed as constants, curves, random between two constants, or random between two curves. We can set up two curves and then have it swap back between one and another. If that's not enough room for you, there is also a button here that allows you to open the editor in a larger window in which you can set up these curves. Now, to save space, we're actually going to edit these back in the inspector. So to do so, you can press the Close Editor button in the inspector. And we're going to set the lifetime right now for constant. Let's go over these values and just take a look at what's available. So the duration is how long the particle system will actually be emitting. The looping is whether you want your particle system to loop or to simply emit once. This might be good for things like explosions. Pre-warm is whether the particle system will already have emitted a certain amount of particles or will start from scratch. We can see this if we press pre-warm. We press stop on the particle effect and then simulate again. We can see that already an amount of particles are already emitted. If we turn this off, press simulate, it will start from 0. Start delay is exactly what it sounds. It's measured in seconds, how many seconds you would want before the particle system actually starts emitting particles. The start lifetime is going to be the lifetime of the particles in seconds. The speed is going to be the speed of the particles. Start size is going to be how big the size of the particles that are emitted. If we can change these sizes to whatever we like. Start rotation is going to be the rotation of the particles when they are emitted. Start color is what color they're going to be when emitted. The gravity multiplier is how much gravity the particles will have over their lifetime. The inherent velocity field is when you have a moving particle system, you might want to take some of the velocity of the actual game object. If we were to move this game object around, we want the particle system to also take in the velocity of the game object to their own. Okay, so simulation space is whether they're going to be on the local or the world space. Play on awake is if the particle system will automatically start when it's created, and the max particles will be the max amount of particles that the system will emit. We'll come back to these in a second. We'll experiment after we cover these. So the emission rate is how many particles are emitted at the same time. If we set this to, for example, to 100, we will still see a constant rate. because the amount of particles that's being emitted is still being covered by the max amount of particles. Excuse me, we have one more here. We have bursts. If we add in the amount of bursts, it will also, on top of having a constant emission, every certain amount of seconds, the particles will emit a certain amount of particles. So, for example, if we add for 1 second, we want to emit not 30 particles, but we want to add 200, we will immediately see these bursts every single second of each particle duration. Okay, so let's go a little lower. We have shape, which is going to be the shape of the emission. Currently, we have it set to cone. There's several options up here, and either emittance from a shell, and we see the shell up here, and I adjust the radius of it. Hemisphere, once again, the shell, only the shell of a hemisphere instead of a sphere. Box, or we can set up a constant mesh, and we can simply assign that mesh of what we want it to emit out of. Could be handy as well, maybe if you are trying to simulate some effects of an organic shape that's emitting particles for some reason. Now for us, actually a cone is perfect. That's actually exactly what we're looking for, so we're going to keep it at the default setting, but we won't want to adjust the radius up here. The radius is going to be a little too large. We want it to emit from a single point, so you can either enlarge this or make this smaller. I'm going to go and change these after a amount of time, so that's fine that I'm leaving this at this arbitrary number. So this emit from will determine whether the particle will originate from the base shell, or the volume. If we can change this, we'll see an effect, either the base shell. And you can see this actually in the game preview mode, the volume or the volume shell. So you can kind of see this. This is starting to form an outline instead of emitting from the base. You really see a pretty stark difference here. Now we have one more field here. It's going to be the renderer. And in the renderer, we can actually assign the texture that we earlier on created. So to do so, we will need to create a material. So let's create one for our particle system. We want to keep things neat, so I'm going to create a specific folder for materials that are going to be separate from the materials of the models. Okay, now I'm going to, with this folder selected, I'm going to click Create, and I'm going to create a material. In the drop-down for the shader, I can create my own shader, or I can use some of the pre-built ones that come with Unity. There are some that are somewhat duplicated, like for example, we have a bump diffuse and diffuse, and also if you go into the mobile, you also have diffuse. These are just shaders which do not have some of the options as in the shaders that you would have for systems with more processing capability, but would save significant amount of computational resources. Okay, so in this case, considering we're going to be doing a particles, there's actually a specific particles field. So if we go into particles, in this case, we're going to choose additive. And now we can assign our sprite here that we created before. We have particle ring. And here we can actually even tint the color. We're going to give this a name, essence material. So now if we go back to our particle emitter, and we can simply take this and we can drag and drop on it. And immediately we see our rings here that are emitting instead of the previous default particle gradient circles. I'm going to switch this back to blue. Let's see how it will look. So it'll be a little bit more visible. So let's try to tweak these values in order to get the effect that we would like. First, we would want to take the duration and probably decrease it somewhat as to how long the particles would actually live, 2.6. Now the particles are still getting through because their speed is too high, but if we slow down their speed, which we probably would want to do anyway, 0.5, Are they still too high? Let's do 0.25, 0.3. 0.3 seems pretty good. Okay, and for start size, let's set up just a random between two constants. It's going to be 0 and let's experiment 0.5. For our color, we don't have to keep this as blue. Let's give this a gradient. It's going to start off with white. It's going to end with blue. Okay. The emission rate, we want less particles. So let's set this at maybe 10, 15. Don't need a burst. I'm going to take this off. And also, we would want to decrease our radius like that. And angle is more or less fine. I think this will be a good enough particle system just to introduce you to Unity's particle system.